For my first ever stitch, what is your favorite book and how did it come to you? For me, it is Moby Dick. I think the best thing ever written on the American continent. And the reason it means so much to me is because of my own life. I was researching a book on cannabis and I'd been at it for 5 years. I didn't realize when I started how big the cannabis story is, how long it goes back into history, and the science of the endocannabinoid system. And so part of what I really wanted to tell was about anandamide, the first neurotransmitter that we found in the human brain that is an endogenous cannabinoid. It helps explain what made cannabis a good medicine for such a long time. And so I started saying, anandamide is my great white whale, because I'd heard that phrase. But I'd never actually read the book and I didn't really know what that meant. And so on my last research trip to see some of the last places, talk to some of the last sources in the west of the US, I was on a big road trip and I decided to take this as my one big fat book. Because on every trip I take one big fat book I should read, classic kind of thing. So I took Moby Dick. And I was enthralled immediately. Before I got out of my home state of Pennsylvania, I was pulling over to the side of the road and taking extra long lunch breaks so I could just devour this book. And by the time I was a third of the way through it, I realized I had the solution for the structure of my own book. Because I had so much information, I didn't know how to put it together. Like, how do you make this into a story? And this was exactly the story that I needed. There is this hunt for the whales, which for me is the hunt for the endocannabinoids and the scientific discovery process. And then there's this also bloody side of turning these whales into money and all of the class stuff going on in Moby Dick as well, with the American machine getting rich off of this bloodiness. And that is the US war on drugs and the awful racism of all of it. So this book was a perfect fit. And so I read it on that road trip and loved it. Then I came home and I read it again and I put all of the notes, I put an index card of notes from each chapter on the wall and started fitting my book to these chapters. And it fit perfectly. This human story of cannabis fit perfectly in the Moby Dick thing in a way that's so perfect, it blew my mind. Of course, it makes sense for me because Melville was a obsessive Dutchman who grew up in the church and then kind of got away from it, and I'm an obsessive Dutchman who grew up in the church and kind of got away from it and then came back to it like he did. And so, you kind of get your own. But that's not the reason all the rest of you should read it. If you haven't, it's amazingly beautiful, fun, hilarious book that talks about so many different types of life, uses so many voices, is very much based on Shakespeare. And if you don't want to read it, listen to it. Frank Miller, the great audiobook reader of his generation, makes it just roll over you. It's so easy. DM me in any way you can and I'll send you the files for Moby Dick audiobook.